is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The World Health Organization says 1 in 3 women endure physical or sexual violence. China's top political advisory body presents nearly 6,000 proposals that will shape the country's future. And we'll have updates on the coronavirus pandemic, including the vaccination campaign in Ghana. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. In business, South African state-owned rail and port company Transnet plans to cancel contracts worth billions of dollars. And in sports, FC Porto knocks Juventus out of the Champions League. We begin in Mozambique, where at least 35 people have died after reportedly eating wild plants as food shortages continue ravaging the northern parts of the country. The incident occurred in the Nampula province. 25 of the victims belong to the same family. According to authorities, locals have recently turned to wild fruits, tubers and other plants to beat hunger. State television has reported that some residents have been grinding wild grass to cook a local porridge called shima, which is traditionally made from maize flour. The current food shortage in northern Mozambique is being attributed to low rainfall. Only 5 out of 23 districts in the province have experienced normal rainfall. Nearly 1 in 3 women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence. That's according to a new report by the World Health Organization. The report is the largest study on violence against women, drawing data from 161 countries collected between 2000 and 2018. The report puts intimate partner violence as being the most prevalent form of violence against women globally. Intimate partner violence affects over 64.1 million women, 641 million women, I should say. Sub-Saharan Africa is among regions with the highest prevalence rates for women aged between 15 and 49. The report, though, does not reflect the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The results paint a horrifying picture. An estimated 736 million women, almost 1 in 3 women globally, have suffered intimate partner violence, sexual violence from a non-partner or both at least once in their lives. And almost 1 in 4 adolescent girls in a partnership have experienced physical and or sexual violence from a partner or husband before their 19th birthday.
We have rather 155 countries who have now passed laws that are related to domestic violence. We continue to push ahead with that work. It's part of the work that we do in UN Women, supporting member states who are passing these laws. And 140 have legislation also on sexual harassment in the workplace. But of course, the challenge of enforcement still remains. And that is where we can all also play a role in supporting the enforcement.
And joining us now to discuss this, we're joined by CGTN's Philly Haza in Abuja, Adil Mahroui live in Cairo, and Angelo Kopler in Johannesburg. Thank you all for joining us. Angelo, let's begin with you. The World Health Organization says intimate partner violence is by far the most prevalent form of violence against women globally. What is the situation there in South Africa? All right, I'm afraid we don't have Angelo at the moment, but let's head off to Abuja, where Phil is live now. Phil, this report we're talking about warns that the true numbers of sexual abuse and gender violence could be much higher, since most go unreported due to stigma. Is this the case in Nigeria?
Absolutely, it is indeed the case in Nigeria, because there's quite a lot of stigma here in the country, especially when cases are reported. We've seen quite a number of times where people report cases and either elements of the society turn against them to ask very weird questions that tend to make them regret even reporting such cases. You'd find sometimes when cases are reported about rape, even up to security operatives, they ask questions like, what if it's a setup? What if it's not true? And so the time for even investigating such cases go almost unhindered, and then either the victim finds a way to just walk away from the case, or justice is never served. And so quite a number of times you've seen analysts and experts asking that more needs to be done in terms of our institutions to uphold the rule of law, to investigate these cases. You also find in terms of domestic violence, when it's reported, you find people asking questions like, maybe the man was pushed to the wall or his limits, and that's why he had to react. But all of these really, I think we're making quite a number of progress, because if you look at some states in Nigeria, especially within the last few months, Bayelsa, Jigawa, and I think Bauchi have actually signed the VAP Act, that's the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, and also endorsed life jail sentences for rapists. And so that means that it will go a long way to deter rapists and any form of violence against women in the country. So that's a lot of progress that we're making, but we need to do more.
Right, so now we have Angelo. Angelo, it's good to have you with us finally. So we're talking about this World Health Organization report that says intimate partner violence is by far the most prevalent form of violence against women globally. The question is, in South Africa, what's the situation?
Well, intimate partner violence continues to be a major problem here. Half of the women murdered in our country are killed by their intimate partner. South Africa, in fact, has reported the highest rates of such murders in the world. And according to a study by UCT, that's the University of Cape Town, a woman dies from intimate partner violence almost every 8 hours. So it's the devastating physical, mental and social consequences of this problem are mostly hidden. COVID, of course, has made the problem more prevalent. It was exacerbated during the lockdowns as people were forced to stay indoors and face their attackers all the time, and support services were also closed at that point, so they had nowhere to go.
And Adel, coming to you in Cairo, Sub-Saharan Africa has been mentioned as having the highest prevalence rate, suggesting that the situation is not as bad in North Africa. Do you agree?
Well, you can say there is a sort of a prevailing situation when it comes to statistics, whether it's the Sub-Saharan region or North Africa in general. It's not so much different. Maybe the rates are different, a bit less in North Africa than in the Sub-African Sahara, yet they remain remarkably high. We have, for instance, the Egyptian National Women Association in Egypt releasing a statistic saying that about 30% of Egyptian families face some kind of physical or verbal abuse. Women have experienced 30% of them in that case. When it comes to physical abuse that is quite harmful, it goes to about 7%. Algeria has reported some domestic violence that led to death. It is within about a dozen, according to Amnesty International, in 1 year, but it remains a figure to consider as alarming. There have been, however, in the past year or 2 or 3 years actually in North Africa, major legislative shift to criminalize and put penalties in terms of financial or even imprisonment for males who abuse female within their family, whether it's a spouse, a partner, or even a child. So in that regard, there is a motion moving, but still the numbers are quite alarming and quite significant to say that there is a massive breakthrough going in society itself in terms of governance. There is a move that is going. Legislative and actual executive authorities are taking action, but to have an impact on society, it's still not so much infused or embedded in the society.
Okay, so Angelo, let's come to you very briefly. South Africa has made headway in dealing with gender-based violence. What are some of the interventions put in place by government?
Well, look, social services are in place in most cities and towns. Those are provided by government, but they're not always accessible. Of course, in the deep rural areas, people have to travel long distances to get from the place that they live at to a town that has one of those social services centres that they can go and sit and have a conversation with. But as I said, during the hard lockdowns, those government services weren't available, and it was left to the NGOs to pick up the slack. But in many cases, women were left to their own devices. Other interventions have been education programs that have been set up and shared with the people across the country. And there also is some training for healthcare workers and social services staff to identify possible IPV victims and then to provide counselling or to advise them to pursue other avenues. But until the underlying social and living conditions are addressed in the squatter camps and in parts of the townships, and law enforcement agencies are not more involved, and they must be made more involved, it's an uphill battle. And that's despite the admirable work that's been done by the agencies in government and also by those NGOs.
Right. Phil, as Angelo mentioned, a big concern has been access to structural social service systems. How difficult is this for victims in Nigeria?
Well, indeed, it's one way to look at it. The fact that there are not enough social services present in Nigeria, when you look at how large, how vast the country is, how populated, we're looking at over 200 million people in the country, and of course, several cases of these violence being reported at certain times. But then I think the major problem will be the current social services that are running in the country to help tackle this issue. The question is, how are they even working? To what platform, what assistance do they have, what support from the government, what response from the society do they have, because that's the foundation that would attract even more social services to operate in the country. And so analysts, activists have pushed for the government to do more in sensitizing, enlightening security operatives, the populace, community leaders, and of course ensure that the justice system works better to ensure that more people get justice for their reported cases, right, and also to ensure that more cases are even reported in the first place, so that it becomes an issue that the government can look into, and also set up more social services and institutions that will tackle this issue.
All right. And Adel, just very briefly, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected women there in Egypt in terms of safety?
Well, the figures the statistics released by the National Women Council have revealed that the domestic violence during last year have risen in terms of the number of cases reported to the authorities, the number of cases that the Egyptian government receives through a hotline dedicated for domestic violence. All of this indicates that there has been an increase from 2020 to the year before, and it is a part of also a wider picture that it has also reflected on the divorce rates as well in terms in annual comparison. So in general, yes, there has been an effect, and the COVID-19 pandemic, or the lockdown to be specific, had more or less had an impact on domestic violence or instability within the households due to the overall conditions, whether it is the situation of the workforce, the unemployment, the economic burdens, and of course the lockdown that has made this a phenomena quite significant.
All right, Adel Mahuri live for us in Cairo, Philly Haza in Abuja, and Angela Kupla in Johannesburg. Thank you all for joining us. Let's now bring in Beth Michoma, advocate of the Kenya High Court, council member of the Law Society of Kenya, and also she's the chairperson of the Gender Committee. Beth, it's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. The World Health Organization says the alarming figures do not reflect the ongoing impact of COVID-19. How has the pandemic worsened the situation for women and girls?
Thank you, Peninah. The pandemic has actually worsened the situation for women and girls, because due to the lockdown systems that have been put in place by most countries, you realize that women and girls are trapped in the house with the perpetrators. Actually, it is quite unfortunate that perhaps in Kenya, the pandemic has actually created a lockdown from 10 at night to 4 in the morning. Nobody is allowed to move in and out of their houses, which means that women and girls cannot seek help in the event that they're being either physically or sexually abused. Further, the perpetrators have gotten a bit bold. They now use the pandemic structures, the lockdown, as a way to control their victims, telling them that you cannot move out of the house, otherwise you'll get arrested. Will the police believe what you're telling them? Will they believe that I assaulted you while you have broken lockdown? And thirdly, the issue of finances has hit a bit close to home. The stress caused by the pandemic has ensured that women and girls are not financially capable to move out of the homes of their abusers. And further, we have seen scenes in African countries where people are being evicted from their homes, especially in Kenya. There have been about 3 evictions from popular areas of living. And this actually exposes the women and girls who have been thrown out of their homes to assault and sexual abuse by other people other than intimate partners. So the pandemic has actually caused a lot of damage.
Right, and but most countries have put in place interventions to address these forms of abuse and violence against women. Yet the impact has not been enough. What more needs to be done?
We need funds. The best is we need funds. We need funds to go towards prevention. We need funds to go towards awareness of domestic violence and their impact on our socio-economic advancement as not only Africans, but members of the world. We need funds not to be diverted from building shelters towards fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. UN Women has called this the shadow pandemic, and I tend to agree with them. We cannot sit in a world where funds are deviated from helping victims of victims of physical and sexual abuse and taken towards vaccines and equipping hospitals without necessarily thinking the impact on women and girls. And further, we need the government to partner not only with civil societies, but with community-based organizations to ensure that every woman and girl shall have a safe place to go to in the event that they have been either physically abused or sexually abused.
And that's very important.
We need to have
Yes, Beth.
We also need to have awareness, basically ensuring that women and girls, do not fear reporting.
Well, I'm afraid we seem to have lost that connection with Beth, but that's Beth Michoma, an advocate of the Kenya High Court, joining us via Zoom here in Nairobi and basically just outlining what really needs to be done to just make this a safe space everywhere for women and girls. Let's now head to Equatorial Guinea, where satellite images now show the extent of damage on a military barracks following a series of explosions on Sunday. The incident left at least 98 people dead. At least 615 others were injured in the blasts. According to the country's defense ministry, the blasts were triggered by fire at the Nkwantoma military base in the coastal city of Bata. President Teodoro Obiang Nguema visited the scene on Tuesday. He had earlier attributed the blasts to negligence related to the handling of dynamite. He also said the explosions damaged almost all homes and buildings in Bata, whose population is over 250,000 people. Recovery efforts are still ongoing. At least 39 migrants died when 2 boats sank off Tunisia on Tuesday. 165 others were rescued as the search for more survivors continues near the Tunisian port city of Sfax. Defense officials said the migrants were crossing the Mediterranean Sea towards the Italian island of Lampedusa. According to a ministry spokesperson, all those who died on Tuesday were from sub-Saharan African nations. The Tunisian coast has become a major departure point for people fleeing conflict and poverty at home, seeking opportunities in Europe. It's 19 minutes into the hour. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Straight ahead. China's top political advisory body presents nearly 6,000 proposals that will shape the country's future. And the UN warns a stalled peace deal in South Sudan is a threat to the country's stability.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. we are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
China's top political advisory body concluded its session in Beijing this afternoon. The Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC, focused on topics like economic growth, rural vitalization, public health, and Hong Kong's electoral system in the past week, and brought up nearly 6,000 proposals. More than two-thirds of those proposals have been put on official record. Over 2,000 advisors at the closing session also voted unanimously to pass the CPPCC National Committee's annual work report. Chairman Wang Yang said the advisory body will remain committed to following the leadership of the Communist Party of China and stressed innovation and inclusiveness in its work ahead.
We, as political advisors, must make better use of the inclusiveness and diversity of the CPPCC to help promote government policies and let more people benefit from them. We must help build consensus in terms of developing the economy and forming new growth patterns. We will do our part in building a modern, socialist China.
For more on this, we're now joined by CGTN's Chao Bing live in Beijing. Chao Bing, what are the highlights from this year's CPPCC meeting?
Yes, Peninah, the annual session for China's top advisory body has wrapped up with the closing meeting at the Great Hall of the People, as you said. During the meeting, several documents, including the CPPCC Standing Committee's work report, were approved. Standing Committee Chairman Wang Yang delivered a speech in which he praised the members' work and efforts during this year's two sessions, and also urged all CPPCC members to keep studying and improving themselves to better carry out their duties in their daily lives. Due to epidemic prevention and control measures, this year's meeting was comprised of 6.5 days. Over these past few days, CPPCC members held group discussions and consultations. They've deliberated on documents including the government's work report and the 14th five-year plan, as well as the long-term objectives reaching as far as 2035. Also, nearly 6,000 proposals in various fields have been submitted at the meeting, and over 5,000 have been handled. These range from accelerating legislation on family education and extending women's maternity leave to better preparing for climate-related disasters. Many of these proposals have triggered heated debate on Chinese social media platform, Peninah.
Right, so several CPPCC members were interviewed via video link before the closing meeting. How did their answers impress you?
As Peninah, this was the last members' corridor in this year's CPPCC meeting. In this round of meeting, members from different walks of life from all across China and from various ethnic groups took questions from media. There were actually two answers impressed me the most. One was from a member from Macau to a question on cultural confidence. He said it is a sacred mission for Macau SAR to protect Chinese history and culture. Culture and history are the foundation of the system. That's the policy of one country, two systems. He said young people in Macau also know and understand country from such cultural perspectives. And many of them look forward to their first visit to the Great Wall, Yangtze River, and Yellow River. Another answer was from a member from Inner Mongolia to a question on ethnic unity. He said there are many young people in different ethnic groups who fall in love and eventually get married with each other. He said China is a national community comprised of many different peoples. He said being friendly, hospitable, and inclusive are good morals shared by all residents in Inner Mongolia. Inner Mongolia residents believe all ethnic groups should embrace one another in order to live a better life. Peninah.
All right, Chao Bing, thank you very much for those insights and for joining us live from Beijing. Zambia's ambassador to China says she firmly believes that the convening of the 2 sessions by China will grant Chinese people a platform to participate in their country's development agenda. According to Ambassador Winnie Chibe-Sakunda, the Chinese government also has a chance to listen to people from the grassroots on how to craft and implement policies that will change their lives for the better. Chibe-Sakunda also said she was impressed by development witnessed in rural areas in China.
There are so many things that Africa, and Zambia in particular, can learn from China on how they implemented these policies which have seen the country really move out of poverty. And so I can say that any Chinese can proudly parade themselves because they have achieved what many countries cannot achieve within a short time. I wish to congratulate His Excellency President Xi Jinping, the central government, the people of China for this great and miraculous, poverty alleviation program, which has been achieved way ahead of time. It's admirable, and we hope that they can help us to achieve the same.
Let's widen the discussion. We're joined by Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, Research Director at the Center for Africa-China Studies, University of Johannesburg. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Having followed the whole 2 sessions gathering, to what extent did Africa feature?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and good day to your viewers and listeners. So, Africa featured quite prominently in the just ended 2 sessions, especially if you look at the importance that Foreign Minister Wang Yi put on Africa's relationship with China during his last press conference, where he mentioned the strides that China has made to try and stem the tide of the coronavirus in Africa, where China has sent vaccines to about 35 African countries. 120 batches of vaccines have been sent, and of course, Chinese expatriates have also been sent to 15 African countries. So this is just so that China could help Africa to recover, because last year China was the only big economy to have shown some positive growth amid the coronavirus pandemic. Africa was badly hit, growing at less than -3%. So what China is doing at the moment is just so that it will ameliorate the decline that Africa has experienced, and that, of course, will have to be shown by tangible results.
What agenda does the 2 sessions set for China-Africa cooperation moving forward?
Of utmost importance, what the China 2 sessions have set right now is a platform on which the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit will be established once it is held here in Africa, in Addis Ababa, in Dakar. I think it will be held in September, if I'm not mistaken. So the agenda, we will have to look at what are the alternative ways through which Africa and China could grow their relationship, because China already now wants to insist on high quality rather than high quantity growth. So which means the economy will not only be driven by manufacturing, as it has always been the case. So that shows that even its relationship with Africa, it has to be recalibrated in such a way that innovation and technology will have to take also a center or a bigger portion of Africa's growth, rather than just depending on commodities whose prices fluctuate, and most of the times they have subjected Africa to the deleterious effects of global economic oscillations in terms of economic growth and the demand for commodity price.
All right, Dr. Emmanuel Matambo joining us live from Johannesburg. Thank you very much. The United Nations mission in South Sudan says it is concerned about how slow it's taking to roll out the peace deal. 5 factions in South Sudan signed the 2018 peace deal to end 6 years of conflict, but forming a new government has already taken a year and still hasn't been completed. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The 2018 South Sudan's peace deal set out a way forward. Various armed groups were supposed to be unified, retrained and redeployed before a unity government could be formed. Up until now, the armies have been in training camps. The building of a national army, police and other organized forces is supposed to be happening at the moment. That exercise has not begun.
We still have many issues that are not yet in fruition. Particularly the county commissioners, we still wait for those to be appointed. The critical appointments in the current state of subnational violence, the amount of subnational violence going on. We've also got, of course, the issues around the constitution, the unification of forces. All of these important parts of the peace process are still to be resolved.
The peace deal also stipulates a number of economic reforms so that South Sudan's central bank can become fully independent. The peace agreement also provides that the Ministry of Finance should be transparent and the National Audit Chamber should be independent and carry out its work without political interference. None of those reforms have begun. The conflict isn't over, though. Armed opposition groups are still locked in battle with the government. Talks with the groups was being held in Rome but were halted because of COVID-19 restrictions. The new unity government says it has resumed talks with the groups in Kenya this week.
The spirit was actually encouraging. There was friendliness, a feeling of trying to get solutions to the problem of our people. We felt that we are all one people of the Republic of South Sudan.
The UN says it is concerned that the elections scheduled at the end of the 3-year transitional period might be delayed, which could lead to more violence in the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
This is Africa Live, coming up in business news. South African state-owned rail and port company Transnet plans to cancel contracts worth billions of dollars. And Tunisia gears up for the launch of its first satellite in the coming days.
Nature is essential for humans to exist, from pollinating our crops to stabilizing our climate. But our natural world is under serious threat. Humanity's influence on the decline of nature is so great that around 1 million species already face extinction. One continent, Africa, is trying to halt the trend. There are some special people doing some incredible work on the ground to help conserve the continent's fauna, flora, and cultural heritage, whilst introducing these riches to the rest of the world.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Africa's state-owned rail and port company plans to revoke contracts worth $3.5 billion awarded to companies, including General Electric and Bombardier 7 years ago. Transnet has asked the High Court to have the contracts for 1,064 locomotives set aside. The company says the deals were based on a flawed market demand strategy. The court application comes a year after Portia Derby took on the role of Chief Executive Officer at Transnet and promised to address years of large-scale corruption. President Cyril Ramaphosa has put the cleanup of state companies at the center of efforts to stem graft following a series of scandals under the previous administration. Still in South Africa, the economy is showing signs of a slow recovery, but still has a long way to go before it can record solid growth. Fourth quarter GDP data shows that the economy grew at an annualized rate of 6.3% in the last 3 months of 2020, but growth for the full year declined 7%. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
South Africa, like most countries across the globe, suffered a massive blow to economic growth in 2020,
but the country was already in a recession when COVID hit.
The truth of the matter is South Africa has been in a declining phase for over the last decade or so. So while we sort of see this positive, uptick in growth, at the end of the day, it's sort of resetting what was previous losses in the years to come, years before. So if you look at it in sort of that aspect, it's important to sort of keep looking ahead and get the right sort of structural transformations in place so we can actually look more towards a positive trajectory rather than just sort of recouping previous losses.
Annualized GDP rose 6.3% in the fourth quarter of 2020. 8 of the main sectors of the economy recorded growth. Manufacturing recorded a 21.1% gain, the largest contributor to GDP. Some economists agree this is an improved performance, but it's coming off a low base.
In 2019, the economy only grew by 0.9%. The previous year, you see considerably 1.5, 1.7 projections versus expectations. So you're finding that South Africa has really had a lackluster growth over the last few years, and this is not simply a COVID issue. And I think just to stress that the positive growth that we have had even before COVID wasn't sufficient in terms of quantum and in terms of rate of growth.
Finance declined slightly while mining slumped 1.4%. Household expenditure increased by 7.5% as consumers started spending again.
The average South African consumer is under severe pressure at the moment. So there's always this uncertainty that do we still have that previous sort of spending power that one could forecast? Just to bear in mind that we're at a record level high unemployment figures at the moment and that the economy has still not fully recovered. So whilst we do see this rebound in expenditure, it will sort of be muted throughout 2021, given that the general pressure that households are under at the moment, and considering the fact that we are not out of the woods yet.
The gains that we're seeing in these GDP numbers are largely as a result of economic activity resuming following the hard lockdown. South Africa still faces the massive challenges it had before COVID. Economists believe that only once these issues are dealt with will we see any real growth in South Africa.
We are sitting at the worst annual fall of GDP since 1946. There's nothing to celebrate. What we can hope for is that this will show our policymakers and our economic cluster that we need an alternative. And I think that the data is telling us this. Regardless of ideological framework, quite clearly the development growth path that we're on is unsustainable. I think it's an opportunity for us to accept that whatever we have tried to do hasn't worked. And I think it's time for us to go back to the drawing board.
Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has delivered his first State of the Nation address after winning a keenly contested election in December. He has pledged to transform the country's economy after it was battered by the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Hospitals will be designated.
President Akufo-Addo's State of the Nation address comes after Ghana's Supreme Court unanimously quashed a petition challenging his legitimacy. The court declared that the petition filed by opposition candidate John Mahama lacked merit. The president says his focus now is to revive the economy after a downturn caused by COVID-19.
Our overall economic growth rate for 2020 was reviewed downwards from 6.8% to 0.9%. This was done to reflect the impact of the pandemic. The fiscal responsibility rule of keeping a deficit within a threshold of 5% of GDP and a positive primary balance for every year was suspended in 2020 to enable fiscal operations to accommodate the impact of the pandemic.
Ghana has begun its COVID-19 vaccine rollout and wants to inoculate 20 million people by the end of the year. The president hopes to create more jobs to support the country's economic recovery.
Government expects economic activity, which has already picked up, to do so even further following the ongoing vaccination exercise and the easing of restrictions put in place to curb the effects of the disease. We expect GDP growth to rebound strongly this year to nearly 5%, above the IMF's 2021 January projection of 3.2% growth for Sub-Saharan Africa for 2021.
President Akufo-Addo's State of the Nation address has received mixed reactions from legislators.
I was particularly happy about the railway program and then the Buankra Inland Port, which of course many young people in Ashanti region are looking up to find jobs.
He's creating the impression that everything is all right, but even the developed countries are telling their people times are hard, we have to do things differently.
The president also outlined key infrastructure development he plans to undertake by the end of his mandate in 2024. It includes the expansion of roads across the country and improving access to healthcare delivery.
President Akufo-Addo could struggle to get legislation passed during his second term in office due to Ghana's hung parliament. He will have to try and get support from the opposition party to make progress on key campaign pledges. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
U.S. House lawmakers are expected to pass a $1.9 trillion stimulus package later on Wednesday. The bill had already gone through both chambers of Congress but was sent back to the House after senators made revisions. Our Nathan King has more from Washington, D.C.
It's close but not quite there yet. The key $1.9 trillion stimulus package that is the key of Joe Biden's first 100 days in his presidency will pass, but it looks like on Wednesday. Remember, we saw it pass in the Senate along party lines. It's now back with the House of Representatives here on Capitol Hill because there's so much been changed. Out goes the $15 an hour minimum federal wage. It's currently at $7.25. That's annoyed progressives in the left of the Democratic Party. Also, the stimulus checks of $1,400 will go to less people, or still between about 250 and 300 million Americans. And Democrats, while they're hopeful, they know that there can be last-minute surprises, but they say relief is on the way to the American people.
We promise to put money in the pockets of everyday Americans who've been struggling through the economic trauma of the pandemic. Mission accomplished. We promised to make sure that children can go back to school safely. Mission accomplished.
And President Joe Biden, ahead of this landmark legislation, toured a hardware store here in northeast Washington, D.C., in my neighborhood, actually, basically promising that help was on the way for smaller businesses. Remember, a lot of big businesses were aided in the first days of the pandemic. They're trying to refocus it on smaller businesses. In fact, there's a whole list of things in this legislation which don't have anything to do with COVID, but will help people and also satisfy a lot of the Democratic agenda that they didn't have under the Trump administration. Expansion, for example, of Obamacare, healthcare, help for pension funds. Also, lots of help for child support in terms of tax credits. A lot of people have criticized that on the right, that it may cause inflation and has nothing to do with COVID, but it will pump prime the U.S. economy. Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs have basically estimates of GDP rising in 2021 between about 6.5% to 7.5%. Will that cause inflation? There are questions all over Asia and Europe about whether asset bubbles are being created here in the US with the stock market and soaring house prices. We'll wait and see, but the Biden administration wants to err on the side of giving too much rather than too little. They say they learned their lesson in the financial crisis of 2008. Nathan King, CGTN, at the US Capitol.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury Secretary says her team will work to quickly distribute $350 billion in aid to state and local governments once the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill is passed. The Treasury is also responsible for sending out the $1,400 payments to individuals as part of the American Rescue Plan Act.
In the coming days, our Treasury team is going to work to get this aid out in the quickest way possible, and the one that produces the greatest impact. To do that, we're going to need your input and advice. If we do our job, I'm confident that Americans will make it to the other side of this pandemic and be met there with a measure of prosperity. By the end of the year, I expect your city economies will resemble 2019 much more than 2020.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up, we give you updates on the coronavirus pandemic, including the vaccination campaign in Ghana.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
The government in Somalia has imposed new strict measures to stem the second wave of COVID-19 in that country. Somalia's information minister says large public gatherings will be banned for a month. Schools and universities, government offices and sports arenas will be closed for 2 weeks. It will now be mandatory to wear a face mask and observe 2-meter distancing. Somalia's health minister had earlier warned about the measures due to a rapid rise in coronavirus cases in the country. Meanwhile, Somalia is set to receive 1.3 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines in the coming weeks.
To curb the spread of coronavirus in the country, the Somali government will carry out the following measures to stem the effect of COVID-19. The institutions will remain closed for 2 weeks. Every person must wear a mask when in public places like mosques, markets and so on. Government offices will also close for 2 weeks. The staff will work from their homes.
When we look at this second wave in 2021, we've lost 2 people in January and over 60 people in February, according to available data. There's been a rapid rise in the number of cases, and we asked ourselves the difference between this wave of coronavirus and the previous wave, because more people are now adhering to the coronavirus rules, like wearing masks.
Ghana, one of the first African countries to begin mass inoculations against COVID-19, is battling vaccine hesitancy. Persuading people to take the vaccine is a challenge, which is why public figures, celebrities and journalists are getting involved. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Ghana's capital, Accra.
Journalist Israel Lai wants to encourage fellow Ghanaians to take the COVID-19 vaccine, which is why he has shared a video of himself getting the jab on social media. With some 300,000 followers, his hope is to persuade skeptics that getting the vaccine is essential to their safety. He was among the first Ghanaians to receive the AstraZeneca vaccine, which Ghana received under the Global COVAX Vaccine Sharing Initiative.
I was fine till about 24 hours later. Then the usual headache that I'd been having became, it was mild. My headaches have been mild, but this one became a bit severe. But I can't really say whether it was my usual headaches post-COVID or it was because of the vaccine.
Lai's COVID-19 inoculation comes a month after he thinks he contracted the disease. He says he may have been infected with COVID-19 after being exposed at his workplace.
Vaccination is one way we're going to help arrest this situation because we don't have a cure. And if you're taking the vaccine, then it prevents you from getting COVID. And if we're all able to take the vaccine, or as many of us as possible are able to take the vaccine, then we're looking at herd immunity.
Since the outbreak of the pandemic, Lai has been sharing daily updates to his followers on social media to help curb the spread of the disease. Some Ghanaians are still reluctant to take the COVID-19 vaccines as the rollout goes on. This is due to some myths circulating that the jabs could cause infertility and alter people's DNA. Lai wants to use his social media platforms to raise more awareness about the vaccines. Ghana is planning to inoculate 20 million people by the end of the year. There are concerns that a delay in the delivery of vaccines could hamper the country's fight against the pandemic.
The government clearly has funding to pay for it. So the funding won't be a problem. Yeah, maybe getting as many doses as we want and in good time may be a problem.
Ghana has approved Russia's Sputnik V vaccine for emergency use and plans to acquire mass shipments for the second phase of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Lai wants to track the country's progress and post daily updates on his social media platforms. He hopes this will help people believe the vaccines are safe and encourage them to go for their jabs. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Let's head over to Tanzania, where travelers entering or leaving Zanzibar will be able to get a COVID-19 test at major hotels with results electronically posted to relevant authorities. This follows the introduction of what the Ministry of Health in Zanzibar has termed as COVID-19 electronic laboratory reporting. CGTN's Isaac Lukando brings us the details.
The new testing and reporting arrangement will provide authorities with information needed to better monitor incidences of COVID-19 and respond quickly. According to the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health, the decision also seeks to clamp down on fake COVID-19 test certificates that have recently surfaced. It also aims at removing inconveniences and congestion at the two existing testing centers on the island of Zanzibar and one on the island of Pemba. Zanzibar has reported a steady increase in tourists to the island since late 2020, but there have been concerns that the coronavirus prevention measures such as masks and social distancing are not being taken seriously enough. It is so far unclear how well hotels on the island will handle testing or whether the arrangement will be rolled out to mainland Tanzania. On the mainland, Tanzania only has COVID-19 testing in place for travelers entering and leaving the country at health facilities. It, however, recently established a testing center at the famous Serengeti National Park to make testing easy and convenient for tourists. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Coming up in sports.